Welcome, dear listeners, to the Dish with Dina podcast. I'm so happy to have you join us. Today, my guest is Dr. Stephanie Shane. Dr. Shane and I dish about our community involvement, what it means to grow our professional network, and the importance of keeping our bodies active. Dr. Shane owns and operates House of Physical Therapy, a boutique medical office in New York City, where she works with athletes, office workers, weekend warriors, and new moms. So sit back, enjoy the conversation, and let's dish. Welcome, Dr. Stephanie Shane, to the Dish with Dina podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Dina. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
This is such a pleasure to speak with you because, as you know, as we've spoken before, you are one of the first few of my initial interviews that I'm doing. So you're part of like the guinea pig testing section. And I'm really excited because I have such a very intriguing and interesting lineup, but so many of you complement each other in some way or another. So just in the past week alone that I've been speaking with a few different people from different walks of life. And of course, as you know, we are all from the health and wellness arena in some way, that I think it's a nice blend and everybody brings a little bit something to the table. So I'm very excited to start learning a little bit more about you. And as you know, the theme of the show is about food, nutrition, backgrounds, cultural experiences, so on, and how you got from where you were as a child and growing up to where you are now. But before we launch into that, do you remember how we met or how we ended up finding out about each other? And you want to tell us a little bit about that story?
I do. And as soon as I heard about your podcast, I jumped on it because it is an exact mirror of kind of how we met. I posted something on Instagram. It was maybe the first week that the office was open in the East Village. And it was a little ad about how I was setting up what I called at that time the health network, because I wanted this group of referrals and I wanted to kind of blend together all different healthcare providers, because one person can't address everyone's needs. And that's exactly what you're doing with this show, is kind of showing how we all have similarities, but we need to fill those gaps for our people that we take care of.
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of networking and putting people in touch with each other, and also fostering that relationship of either an interdisciplinary team of like-minded healthcare providers or alternative ways of learning, or just like-minded people in general. You get to form friendships out of a lot of these things too, which is, I think, what we ended up doing. So yes, I was very happy to kind of be a part of your launch with all of that.
Definitely. I think it's amazing that I only had maybe 150 or 200 people following me, and you just happened to be right around the corner and caught that little glimpse of my post.
Well, this has come up in every interview so far, and I've only done a handful, but we always talk about there is no such thing as coincidence. It is such a meant to be kind of situation when things like that happen, because not only was I in the East Village, but literally, like you said, around the corner. And if I remember correctly, I also came to you as a patient too, because I was going through some chronic pain for a while there. And then if we flash forward for a minute too, we also took part in a little community engagement event that we did as well. And that was kind of nice as well, to kind of bring different people from the neighborhood in and share with them our services and so on.
It was. That's exactly what we were trying to create, is that community feel for the neighborhood. And
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that's where I think too, especially, I mean, you've been in this business for quite some time, but you just started in that East Village location pretty early on, and you were not afraid to launch into opening it up to complete strangers, not just obviously your patients and clients, but to people that you wanted to make friends with and network with as well.
Right. That's what was so fun about opening my own space, is that I had the opportunity to use it more than just treating patients. When I'm working for someone else, it's not my space. I'm there set hours and I'm there for patient care, but opening my own practice allowed me to come in on the weekends and meet other providers in the neighborhood, other business owners in the neighborhood. Just, some of my best referrals come from the owner of the hair salon across the street. And, you know, maybe we're not talking medical, but it's still that community feeling.
Right. I love it. I absolutely love stuff like that. So speaking of just, you know, generally discussions about relationships and dynamics in that way, walk me through, because I do like to learn a little bit about people's backgrounds and earlier on, as far as where you grew up and what your family food dynamic was, your cultural background, anything that kind of may have set the stage for launching you in this direction, whether there were positive or negative influences.
Okay, that's a loaded question.
Yes.
So I always say that I'm Italian American, although my actual background is a whole mix. But I grew up with my mother's parents. So my mom's father was Italian. He's from a town called Melilli in Sicily. And he was always the one cooking and getting the family together. And my upbringing was very much Italian. Open door policy. Everybody's in and out. You always make enough food for 20 people because there's a good chance there's going to be 25.
Totally understand that.
Right. But, you know, my grandmother, her family goes all the way back to, you know, I believe they came over on, I don't know if it was the Mayflower, but they were one of the original people coming here. Mm-hmm. And on my father's side, I have a little bit of Native American blood and I have a little bit of Irish, but we had none of that culture in the house. So I always just say I'm Italian.
Mm-hmm. That was the prevalent
right.
culture. Well, I think, you know, we share a little bit of common stuff there too. I'm Italian American as well. We did mm-hmm. grow up in a 2-family house with my mom's mom and dad. And exactly like you said, it was like, is there a small army showing up for Sunday dinner, or is it just us and a million, you know, pounds of leftovers?
Exactly.
So tell me a little bit more about that then. Like how in your formative years did you utilize any of what that kind of, you know, involvement, or however that kind of launched you into the direction of where you're going now? And obviously I realize that's many decades going, but feel free to pick a spot and kind of walk us through a little bit about how you went from one point to the next.
Right. It definitely played a role in my health growing up because I was the kid that was in every sport. I wanted to be on every team. So I would go to 2 to 3 practices after school, either dance, cheerleading, track. I was on multiple outside cheerleading teams. And in order to get the proper nutrition, mm-hmm. I hated every food. And my mom would stick protein powder in anything she could. I'm talking cookies, applesauce. She would put it in a shake. She would even mix it in with my dinner, whatever it was. She would add a scoop of protein powder because I was doing all these sports and I wouldn't really eat. Mm-hmm. So I still have an aversion to vanilla whey protein powder. I will not go near it. I can't smell it. But I mean, she had to figure out how to get this 12-year-old who's running 5 miles and then going to cheerleading practice to eat. And it was always something in the car, sticking a bar or a shake. And
right.
Yeah, I could live off of chicken nuggets and buttered noodles if I was given the option.
I have a question about childhood sports because I'm quite the opposite. I have an aversion to peach schnapps, so that tells you a little bit how my life was back in the day. But my question is, especially in, I guess, is that elementary school or high school in that time?
Yeah, it was around middle school to high school. Yeah.
Did they have a trainer, a coach, a dietitian, nutritionist on staff, or not necessarily? Okay.
No, not at all. They didn't really talk about nutrition. I would have a candy bar from the vending machine at cheerleading practice, and that was totally fine.
Right, as long as you were eating something. Yeah. And the reason why I bring stuff like that up is because, like we were saying before, everybody kind of specializes in something, and yet we're often untapped as resources. So you don't need to know everything. You just need to know who to go to know the other things that you don't know, know necessarily. And so it's possible that maybe, obviously depending on the school, the budget, the resources, they weren't even thinking about that. But there is a lot of opportunity, I think, for people in different worlds, like especially yours and, the physical components and the food components, where we can step in and kind of promote ourselves in that way, or look for opportunities to happen in the sense of not just about getting business, but about how can I help? What is happening? What's the problem that I can solve and help people that might not even realize that there's a problem there, of not necessarily making sure that you were being nourished as a child athlete.
Yes, absolutely. There could have been some guidance or some, professional that saw how many sports I was in, how much I was working out, and gave that piece, because each team was separate. So the other kids didn't have the same demands. And my mom was the only one who was kind of trying to figure out the best way. And her method was to load me up with vitamins and as many supplements as I could. And, that's not exactly fun for a 12-year-old, but she saw that I needed it.
Yeah. She thought she was doing the right thing to fill in, to make sure that she's supporting you, especially if you're not, a healthy, normal eater, in the sense of like you were kind of maybe picky in that way. So she was doing the best she could to at least make sure she's giving you performance, performance needs and so on.
And I made it very difficult for her.
Yes. As most children do with their parents. But that's something that's interesting too, because she did some research, I would assume. She knew that athletes have to repair with protein. And I think that's cracking me up with the protein powder thing, because I spoke with another person who does work in sports dietetics recently, and there is an actual calculation of X amount of minutes equals X amount of carbs or X amount of protein, depending on if you're doing endurance training or you're doing weights or, whatever competitive thing that you're doing in quote unquote fueling for that activity. So it's almost like a science within a science in that way, which again, I'm not familiar with it at all, but I'm learning about that too. And that's also some specialties that are involved in that arena as well.
Right. That is definitely a specialty all in its own. There's so much detail that goes into it.
So moving from where you were in the younger time of your life, what brought you into being a little bit more interested in what you're doing now? Walk us through that process.
So just like the food aspect, the injury maintenance or pain maintenance aspect was the same. So I would come up with these little aches and pains. I rolled my ankle today, or my shoulders bothering me from doing lifts. And the typical response is you bring your kid to the doctor, and the doctor tells you to rest, ice, Advil, to use a brace. And those aren't really practical things when you're doing 2 and 3 sports. And a brace on, a teenager gets in the way. It's not practical. I would end up taking it off. And they were always looking for a bigger cause of why I kept getting injured. It was pretty obvious now that we look back, and, I was doing all of these sports and not eating well. So as an adult, it's kind of blatant. But at the time, we were trying to figure out what the overlying issue was. And I went to PT, and it was a very small practice. It was a husband and wife, and the wife dealt with children and the husband dealt with adults, and I fell right in the middle. So they tried to make things really fun for me and strengthen instead of tell me to rest. And that was the first time someone just looked at me and said, you keep getting injured because you're weak and you're trying to do all of these things that you need to be strong for.
That is something that so it's almost preventative in the way, right?
This is what we're talking about with preventative.
Right. With managing care, is that you're making sure you're strengthening whatever that weakness is. So not in the case of the physical fitness activity, we're building up on the muscles. In the case of the food stuff, we're making sure that you're nourishing yourself. You're getting enough energy. You're making sure that you're recovering in whatever way that you needed, either fueling as far as to move, or making sure that your, protein needs are being met for your muscle tears and so on. Just a question about that though, because I think I remember some conversations coming up in previous discussions with some personal trainers and other friends of mine in class about defining what like the core is, understanding your body's anatomy and what we define as the core or whatever we need to strengthen ourselves. So obviously we know, push-ups and pull-ups and any kind of weight resistance training will help us build up muscle mass, and it will help protect our bones, and it will help prevent fractures in the future. Hopefully it also helps with balance and so on.
Yes.
But it's almost like defining what the soul is. What is the core when people use that terminology? I need to strengthen my core.
Right. So the default answer is it's your abs.
Okay.
But it's more than that, because your core is anything that supports your trunk. So anything that's going to keep you in an upright position. So yes, your abs are the center of that. But as you see on Instagram and social media, this big push for the glutes. The glutes are what keep you upright. If you don't have strong glutes, then your trunk falls forward and you collapse into that C-shaped posture. Now, if we go up from there, your mid-back, your thoracic spine, your rhomboids, your upper back is also part of your core, because again, if you don't have strong support at your shoulder blades, then everything's going to round forward and you're going to look like a C hunched over your computer.
I am quite literally sitting up straight as you're talking. I'm trying to engage everything right now. That's really fascinating to me, because those are, I guess, the larger muscles, right? Those are the things that are helping you, like you said, keep erect or keep straight up, so that you're not weakening or softening any of those things. And then in case you do end up injuring something, that I would assume you're more likely to heal quicker.
Right. So we always couple the core with whatever extremity we're working on. So if you have a shoulder injury or a knee injury, we're still incorporating core in your routine, because you need to be able to stabilize proximal before you can work distal. So if you're doing bicep curls and you see someone swinging a weight, that weight is probably a little bit too heavy for them, and they're not stabilizing at their core in order to support and properly work the bicep. I think the biceps is always a nice reference, because everyone can picture that.
Right. And I was going to say, this is very interesting too, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how to work out. And that goes back to the discussion about not necessarily hiring specialists, but also, just reaching out or referring to people who know how to teach you how to do things, whether or not you hire them or you watch a YouTube video on something to teach you about, strength and position and all that stuff, so that you are not necessarily hurting yourself, or that you are a little bit more resilient. Would you agree in that one too? Like, at least, don't take it upon yourself to do anything without maybe contacting somebody or consulting someone first.
Yes, and I think that's twofold, because one is knowing that you need the help and being able to be humble enough to look for it. And then two is knowing who to look for help. I get a ton of inquiries where they're saying, I'm not sure if you're the right person, but I'm going to ask you this question. And then I get them on the phone, and maybe they're good for PT, maybe they're good for another referral. And it's just being able to ask for help. And, sometimes you ask the wrong person, but they can lead you in the right direction. And that's why we have this network.
Mm-hmm. And thank goodness there are people out there who are willing to reach out. I feel the same way with nutrition and food and chronic diseases. I might not necessarily be specializing in one particular illness or the other, but I can at least give people 15 minutes of my time and then put them in the right direction to send them into another, person's world who is a little bit more savvy in that respect. Or again, just to give them guidance, because I do think there's so much misinformation out there. Even though I do appreciate people wanting to be healthy and well, taking it upon themselves sometimes could be a little bit more detrimental.
Yes. What I always say is, you can find this answer on Google, but you may not know how to implement it, right? All of the advice that I give is very simple, but would you be able to match that advice up to what you need? That's the part that you need the expert for.
I absolutely mirror that, in that the stuff that we talk about, the basics of food and nutrition, is probably nothing that you haven't heard or learned when you were in kindergarten, like eat your fruits and veggies, go play outside, etc. But it's a behavioral component in there as well. Mm-hmm. So would you also say that the therapy part of your role is also teaching people to kind of, look inward in that way and prioritize certain things, not just going through the motions of do this and fix that.
Yes.
But to engage in that routine or to make that a priority in some way.
So much of it is mindset. And I think that's why I appreciate that my undergraduate degree is in something different. I actually studied psychology first with a focus on brain and behavior. And I use that every single day. And go ahead.
That is so, I was going to say that is something that I tell a lot of my students too. If you have the ability to get a second degree or at least strengthen your skills in whatever, a certification in something, try to make sure it's counseling or it's psychiatry, psychology in some way, because you really need to understand why people do what they do and not just how to fix it. You have to actually walk them through barriers and get them to that place of empowering them as well.
Right.
So that is fantastic that you have that in your back pocket, because you really have that, 1-2 punch that you're delivering when people come to visit you.
It's the mind-body connection. And routine definitely plays into it. I mean, most of the patients that I see are young professionals who have very demanding schedules, and their gym time is precious stress relief. And when there's an injury and they feel like they can't do whatever class or run or triathlon training that they had in mind, it totally throws off their day and the anxiety raises. And just keeping the routine of, if you would normally run at this time, I'm going to give you these exercises to do in placement of that run, and we will slowly phase back into your desired sport.
Right. I made mention in the beginning of some of the interviews that I was doing that while I'm not going to focus on the fact that we are currently in the middle of a pandemic, there are definitely discussion topics that are coming up that are applicable to that, but it also applies to any time anybody's thrown off a routine in some way, whether you're under some stress factors, you change jobs, you change locations, or you're under illness or injury or anything like that. So what would be something that you think people can implement in that way that could at least help them feel a little bit more quote unquote normal or regular when that is the outlet for them?
Right. So I focus heavily on the time. So if you normally run in the morning and that's how you start your day, you're going to wake up and you're going to do this routine in the morning. And I've even carried that through to our typical treatment is between 6 and 8 visits over a 3-month time frame. So we slowly wean down to every other week, once a month. And then I actually put an appointment reminder in the schedule on the days that the person would normally come and see me. And they get that email the night before at 7 a.m., you're supposed to do PT. And they don't come to the office, but they're doing their routine at that time. And it kind of just, this is your new regular. Every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m., you're going to do 30 minutes of exercise. And, that's a nice transition to moving back to the gym or, just making it part of your daily habit.
Right. And I think it's also a small but necessary and quite lovely added value to have somebody in your corner that you are working with who can keep you on track and keep you somewhat accountable in that way too. So, it probably doesn't take you much effort when you're done working with somebody to put that little flag of a reminder to send them out, or a 1-week follow-up, just checking in, you haven't made your appointment, or how are you doing, whatever it is, just to kind of gently encourage people, because I do think we often kind of get off track. And it's sometimes not as easy to get back on it. But if we know somebody's there helping us focus and repeat those behaviors, then they become habits and then become lifestyle.
And it's a lot harder to build that healthy habit than it is to break it. I read something about it takes 48 hours to break a habit, and it takes 3 weeks to build it. So one good Netflix binge over the weekend and you've got to work real hard to get it back on track on Monday.
You're done. It is. It's that upward momentum that just feels like the hardest struggle for some people. What do you, just going related to this, what are your non-negotiables when it comes to daily routines, daily habits, and whatever keeps you kind of, living and leading by example?
Ooh. That's that's a tough one.
I have none, just to FYI. I feel like every day is completely different for me, but I do start off with a couple of little things like some yoga stretches and things like that. I try to eat during certain times of the day because I'll forget to do that sometimes. But is there anything that you kind of make sure that you've completed during the day, whether it's business or professional or, relationship wise?
Yeah. So you would laugh at my morning routine because basically the alarm goes off and my boyfriend calls it whack-a-mole. I have to turn that sound off as quickly as possible. And then I basically roll onto the floor and do it's called the world's greatest stretch. It takes about 30 seconds on each side. And then brush my teeth, get dressed, and I'm out the door. I'm that quick. And if I linger, my routine gets thrown off. So I'm an up and out, run to the train kind of person. And we've recently been much better having dinner together every night. And I know we're filming this in the middle of a pandemic, so we're actually physically home. So currently we're having 3 to 4 meals a day. But before this, throughout the fall, we made it a habit to wait for each other to have dinner and actually cook. And that's hard because usually I get home around 9:30, 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
But sitting down at the end of the day together to have a meal and have that conversation, it's just so valuable when you have a crazy schedule. And, we're working 50 plus hours a week at a minimum.
Right. And again, with there might not be 2 days in a row that are the same as the others, depending on if you're doing billing one day or administrate or marketing one day or whatever you're doing, that it can be quite varied.
The behind the scenes, there's always something else to do.
I do. And I was going to say, this goes to, as much as I think sometimes we strive for the ideal way or try to mimic what other people are doing, because if she looks good, I often say that's the thing that I have the biggest problem with a lot of, not just celebrity promotions, but anybody, any family member who will say something like, if I can do it, so can you, or if I can become an entrepreneur, then so can you. While yes, we can share resources of what made us be successful, it's always basically, I think, what is most appropriate for us. So in your case, you fall on the floor and go out the door like within 3 seconds of that alarm. I set the alarm, and I'm not making this up, 3 hours before my first anything. So if I have a meeting at 9 or I have to leave the house at 7 or whatever it is, my alarm will go off 3 hours before, because that's how long it takes me to get up and move. But within those 3 hours, I'm doing some things. I'm doing some, maybe gentle yoga, or I'm maybe doing meditating, or maybe if I feel like it, I'll go to the gym and do a little bit more of, cardio workouts that I don't necessarily want to do at home. Or I will sit and stare into space, or I'll walk through my brain, because a lot of times there's just way too much going on in there, and I'll try to jot things down and, just write things out and empty out my head so that I'm a little bit more focused when I start the day. And then my actual day has a lot of segments in it too, where I like working in like 2 to 4 hour chunks and then just taking a giant break. And then sometimes that's what ends up like you. I end up not being done until, 10 o'clock or so, or even midnight sometimes, which I try not to do. Right. Do you have any set wake up and sleep times? Like, do you at least try to go to bed by a certain time and always have the same wake up time? Because I've heard that's something that is often good too, regardless if it's a weekend or whatever day, that you should at least be consistent in wake up and sleep times for your body.
So you can follow my example on stretching, on exercise, maybe even on eating lately, but please do not follow my sleep habits.
Okay. I love the confession. The confessional.
That is something that I've had multiple people send me links to studies on how terrible it is to have under 6 hours of sleep. Most of the time, because I'm getting home so late, we cook, we sit down and eat. It's midnight to 5 a.m. My alarm goes off at 5:15, and I sprint for the 5:35 train to get there for my 7:30 patient. That's kind of my typical. And I've slowly eased away from that. Starting in January, that was one of my hard goals for this year, was to get rid of either one session at night or one session in the morning so that I could have that a little bit longer gap.
Right. Have a little breathing room in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I will not send you any more scientific studies on sleep and brain health.
If you want to talk about them, the routine is huge. I worked in between college and PT school, I worked for a doctor on the Upper East Side that specialized in chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgic encephalitis. Mm-hmm. And the thing that helped the most was setting sleep habits and eating habits. And I'm not talking about the food that you eat, just the times. Right. So getting that rhythm, because, when you're suffering from these chronic conditions, everything is upside down and you're just trying to appreciate sleep when you can get it and appetite when you have it. And having the routine was the biggest factor in recovery. I think
I went through an episode where I was convinced I had chronic fatigue syndrome, and I've since been looking into it. I don't know if there was a test at the time to definitely diagnose it, or if it was like a rule out type of thing, but I definitely sympathize with people who go through that. And I think that's why I maybe be a little bit more structured in that way, that I try to at least, bookend my day and make sure that I'm getting some sleep. I know that if I don't sleep if I don't sleep at least 7 hours and say 15 minutes or something, I am completely groggy. I have a huge amount of brain fog, which at some point I might want to interview somebody who's a little bit more aware or a little bit more involved in that particular aspect of, brain health and sleep habits and so on, because I'm very fascinated by how it throws off everything, not just your brain, but your gut.
It does.
Right? There's a lot of mind body type of things going on there too.
I will listen to that interview and take notes.
Yes. And then we'll organize like a sleep challenge. Oh, actually, I think I organized a sleep challenge last year, but I don't know if anybody held to it. I wanted to not switch gears, but I wanted to just check back with you on something else we were talking about with movement and keeping consistent of movement, and kind of, I've been hearing like motion is lotion and lubricating the joints. And I teach a little bit of life cycle nutrition. I teach a little bit about the physical activity aspects of as you're aging. So can you speak a little bit about that too? Is it too late to start? If you've been broken, can you fix yourself in some way, or, make accommodations? And give some guidance on maybe people who are either struggling to get started or have been injured and not necessarily know what to do to kind of get back on the track of things.
I have so much on this. My little tagline for the business is rest isn't an option. Maybe I should think through with the sleep part, but
right. You mean rest.
Certain things don't get better with rest. And if you have pain because of tightness or weakness, that's not going to get better with rest or any sort of pill, whether it's Advil or a stronger pain medication. So obviously we're talking about someone who has been screened by a professional, but you always need to keep moving. And that lubricating the joints phrase is real. I sat in on a lecture with a couple orthopedists about 2 weeks ago, and something that really caught my attention was a study comparing a sedentary individual, so someone who sits for most of the day, has less than a mile of walking or movement in their day over a 2-year period, to someone who does an intense sport. So a couple marathons a year, very high intensity, lots of jumping, hit. And what they found is equal levels of inflammation on the knees of individuals who are doing high impact versus someone who is completely sedentary. So not moving is just as dangerous as the heavy wear and tear of a high impact sport. Right. So if you're afraid to move because you have some sort of pain, know that the movement is going to help. It's not going to make things worse.
Right. Because we do go through normal wear and tear just by aging. A lot of our body systems just kind of naturally shut down or don't continue to build in that way. So it's up to us as the human being can voluntarily continually move through doing something. So is it true that every little bit counts, or is that maybe not so much, depending on what you define every little bit to be? Because we talk sometimes about NEAT, right? Like non-exercise, something, whatever it is, about just moving up to, go to the machine, get a bottle of water. Do those count towards physical activity, or are we talking try to structure your day, even if it's not 30 minutes in a row, to do 10 minutes of something that is strenuous or, cardio, something like that?
I believe all the little things count. Right? All of those little trips to the water cooler or getting up and changing positions. One of the recommendations that I give for someone who's really glued to their computer for their full 8+ hour day is to change the seat, the height of your seat. So if you're always sitting at that perfect 90 degrees with the back support and your arms are at a perfect angle, guess what? Your body gets used to being in that position. So when you go to stand up, it doesn't really like the elongated position anymore, and you feel stiff and cramped. If you constantly shift in your seat, cross one leg, put one leg up on a step, and you're always changing, then you're not giving your body the same input for an extended period of time. That demonstration where someone's holding half a cup of water, right? And it gets so heavy by the end. It's the same thing for your body. If you're in perfect posture, it doesn't matter if you stay there for an extended period of time. That force is still adding up.
You actually do need to move things around and rotate things. I think that's a great suggestion, because so much of us do either sit like you were saying, or we have a lot of the people who are, on their phones all the time as far as screens are concerned, and walking around on the trains and wherever we're moving from place to place, just head down all the time. At some point, I'm assuming your body's going to not love that position anymore. And it's going to be harder for you to even stand up, if not completely go forward, like you were saying, with the roundedness of that curvature of the spine at some point.
I mean, I'll give you a little visual while we're talking. We've been on the phone over 20 minutes now. So far, I've been laying on my stomach. I'm now standing with one leg up on a chair. I've paced back and forth. There is no way that your body likes to be sitting for an extended period of time. Even if they say 2 hours, that is a very long time to be in the same position.
So always be moving in some way. Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit too about if there's a difference, or if there's not, in your typical client versus your ideal client, who you prefer to work with and you feel much, more comfortable with, versus people who usually come to you for whatever, issue or condition?
So my ideal client kind of found me, and then it grew from there. So in my first job out of school, I was working out of a gym, and a lot of the people that were coming in were young professionals who are taking boutique classes. So your bar class, your Pilates, your HIIT style, rowing, all of those kind of niche New York City classes. And they were referring their friends because they were so happy that they were able to reduce whatever smaller ache or pain that was stopping them from working out, but wasn't necessarily so bad that they felt like they had to go to a specialist like an orthopedist, or they couldn't commute to work. So I'm kind of in that fitness athlete zone, right?
Okay.
And I do have some people that come to me now that don't fit that criteria, or, maybe their goal isn't to stay active. And I feel like those people, after 1 or 2 sessions, we can kind of feel we're not the best fit. And I've learned to have that conversation up front over the phone before going through the process. And it's not that I don't want to work with that person. It's that my office is set up and geared towards the person who's trying to get back to a sport, or trying to get back to walking 3 miles in their daily commute, or who rides their bike over the bridge to get to work and now they have to take the subway. Those are the people that do really well with me because of the structure. I don't see people 3 times a week. I see them once a week or once every other week, and I give a lot to do on your own. So if you're not used to working out on your own, you may not be as successful without the guided input.
Right. And I think that's an important piece to recognize, both on the provider's end and the patient or client's end as well, that it's not, you don't have to stick with somebody just because they're close, you were referred to by the doctor, they're in your insurance network or whatever. If you feel like you're not benefiting from either way, or as the provider, if you feel like you're forcing yourself outside of what we would, I guess, call our niche of, who are normal population, the people we work with, it can feel like it's not a good fit, and it's not necessary to continue that relationship. And so we go back to that discussion about who can we help refer people out to. And just instead of saying we're not working with each other, I can definitely think that you might be better suited with this person. And I think that helps us grow too as professionals, is that we continue strengthening those skills, both as business aspects, but also in our knowledge of our specialty in some way, that we become experts in the field in that way. And that people do want to come because they know you work with that particular population, you understand them, you get them, and you design and implement plans and strategies that are successful to them. So I think that's fantastic insight. Yeah. So just
if it's something that
go ahead, sorry,
the provider is the most comfortable with, and the patient fits the best, it's just going to be a better outcome overall. Like, that was my background, right? That's how I got into PT, is I had small aches and pains that stopped me from doing the things I love to do. So I relate so much to that person that I give my all, versus, something that I may not be as familiar with. It's going to be a struggle on both ends. So I might as well pair you up with the best person to understand your needs.
Right. Right. Exactly. You've been through something. It's nice that, and I think I don't know if every single person who ventures into the healthcare world has a personal story like that, but I think a lot of people I've spoken to do. We come because we had an issue ourselves and we were trying to fill a need that we didn't see was there. And much like you were saying before, when you worked with that couple, and you went from, just resting and bracing to actually moving through the physical, the therapy part of it, that you saw a difference in things and you really saw the benefit of it. And then you became in love with wanting to, push that forward. So right now, do people see you through medical referrals, like doctor referrals, or can they just walk in and, call you cold and get it, get a meeting with you or a session with you? And by right now, I don't mean just generally today isn't the pandemic, but like anywhere.
The New York State guidelines are physical therapists have direct access. So that means that you can see a physical therapist for a condition that you've woke up with. So 10 visits or 30 days is kind of the guideline. And then if you're not seeing improvement around that mark, that's when it's suggested that you refer out and just screen to make sure that there's nothing else going on. But the reason that they've increased our degree to a doctorate is because we had an entire year of differential diagnosis. So that means if you come in with back pain, I know how to screen and see, is this back pain caused by your kidney, which I've had that happen, where I had a young girl who came in with kidney issues, and I knew to refer her out. Right. So it is okay to come to a PT first. Usually we have appointments available sooner than the specialists. And then we know how to kind of differentiate from there.
I love that. It's not like you're doing x-rays in the studio. But you're able to diagnose in that way. So people don't necessarily have to say, well, hopefully if they broke their hand, they would go to the hospital and definitely get that checked out. But coming to you with the general aches and pains, or my knee's been hurting me and I'm standing really weird, and can you help me with my back? That sort of thing you can absolutely address. And then if something more serious comes out of it, they can move on to somebody else. I love that.
One of my favorite clients to work with is the Australian that's moved to the East Village, because one of my first questions is always, have you seen a doctor for this? And they look at me with this puzzled, confused look of, why would I see my doctor for this? Why would I see my physician? My neck hurts. And most people go to their primary care and then they get a referral to PT. And you're like, well, what does he know? I don't have a cold. And apparently in Australia, it's just normal. If you have a muscle or joint ache or pain, you go to the physio. And if you have a cold, then you go to your primary care. And I wish that would be more an accepted policy here, because it is a little bit faster. And we do have the knowledge to send you out if it is necessary.
I think I was just talking to my mom about this the other day, where no offense to the generalist, but yes, if you know for sure you having a specific condition that doesn't require you having to go to your primary, then move on. Like, go to somebody who can take care of you right then and there with knowing
And
what they're doing.
It's not
So
trying to cut anyone
yeah, go ahead.
out,
I'm
because
sorry.
I have a great network of primary care physicians right here in the East Village.
Right.
And we do refer over to them, and our patients have a good relationship with us. So I even have a couple of young girls who have emailed me and said, I have a cold. Do you know who I should go to? And it's not that they're coming in for PT for the cold, but they trust my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. When I was working in the OBGYN office, a lot of times people would ask me for prenatal stuff, but then they also asked, do you know pediatrician? I unfortunately did not, but obviously everybody else I worked in there did, because we didn't do pediatrics in that center. But it's growing and expanding the network and understanding who to send out for, and also making sure you keep in contact with a lot of people as well, like, regular check-ins with whoever's in your network. Which I was going to say, if it's okay with you, I'm looking to wrap up our conversation by asking you, what are your go-to resources? Like, how do you stay abreast of what you're doing? Whether anybody who's listening to this might want to also go down that path and do what you're doing, or just get a little bit more understanding of, again, we always joke about the Dr. Google, but like, what would be some of the resources that you specifically go to as a professional and that you might also recommend, say, for patients and clients to look at?
Oh,
if anything comes to mind. Yeah. I mean, do you have things like that? Like, where you go to, conferences, yearly conferences that are geared towards your
definitely
specialty, your
we
profession?
actually had a class coming up that was canceled or rescheduled for later this year with the Institute of Physical Arts. So that's a manual based class to fine tune our hands-on skills. So I was really looking forward to that. Hopefully we'll still be able to take it. I mean, I just read a lot. I listen to a lot of different podcasts. I read a ton of books. Some of them are business related. Some of them are medical, and try and get a broad perspective. So I don't necessarily have one person that I go to, but I've become very good at matching this topic will hit home with this person. So I just reevaluated a patient last night who I haven't seen in 6 months. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I wrote some names down for you because we always exchange tips at the end of the session. And I left because I didn't realize that we did that.
Right.
And he gave me a couple people I didn't even realize. So he gave me a couple people that he found that were into strength training. And he was like, you should check these guys out. And I gave him an article to read.
So cool.
And it was like, I guess I've just developed that into my natural conversation. And that's how I refer patients to you, or, the other dietitians in my network. Is this person is having an issue with X, Y, and Z. They'd be a good fit for Dina. This person is having A, B, and C. They'd be a good fit for, someone else. And it's just, when you deal with people all day long, you kind of get to know who would vibe with who.
Yes. And I think what I liked about what you were saying too is something that I speak a lot to my interns and some of my students as well, that you don't just take your job and make a job, you're making a career out of it. So it's not just about going to the office and calling it a day at the end of the night. Like, you're making time to read and to listen, and not just about nutrition or fitness or physical therapy. We're reading about business and marketing and promoting ourselves on social media, or, growing an audience, or how to create courses. Like, we're trying to get our feelers out there, because it is about being of service to whomever needs us. And we can't just rely on people walking in the door. We have to make sure that we get our voice out there, and that book smart, I say this all the time, book
so
smart
true.
Ain't street smart. So just because you've read all your texts, right? Just because you read all your textbooks, you might not have that bedside manner. And in nutrition, at least in our program, I know we went through all of the science courses, but we had very few counseling sessions. And so that's something I often encourage people to, like, take a course, or try to get certified in speaking to people's behaviors, like we were saying before, understanding behind the scenes of stuff. It's not just about throwing a meal plan or throwing an exercise, routine in front of somebody. It's about saying, what are the barriers, and helping them understand that they can chip away and they can be empowered and move through those things, and listening and being sensitive to them too, right? Not just saying, if I can do it, you can do it, or this is what my other clients did and they had success. It's about really listening to your patients and your clients and catering to them in that individualized way. Right. So I'm that's why I enjoy speaking to people with you, because you all get it. You get it. Yes. We're all of that same mindset that we grow. Yeah. So what is, as we're wrapping up here, bringing it back to the whole food discussion, pun intended, what is on your plate today, both work, personal, professional, whatever, and food? What are you planning on eating as soon as we hang up here?
My food habits are a little bit repetitive, and that's another thing that I didn't notice until I was going to the deli every day, and I would just say my order: 2 eggs, turkey, avocado, and ketchup. And the guy would always say back to me, Chris, he'd be like, no cheese, every single day. No cheese. And then one day I came in and I was like, you know what? I think I'm feeling a little different. Can I have 2 hard-boiled eggs, a slice of turkey, and cut up avocado? And he just
really
laughed
jazzing
at me.
It up.
He was like, you know what? You can have eggs every day if that's what you want. So right after this, I'm going to make myself 2 fried eggs, a slice of turkey, and an avocado, and I'm going to put some ketchup on top.
That sounds delightful. That sounds delightful. And as far as your plate as work and whatever things you have to get done, is it a very busy day for you today? Which I appreciate your time taking out of whatever it is that you were doing or planning on doing.
My week has been condensed into 3 days of sessions, and then I try and do my behind-the-scenes business work on Mondays and Fridays. So today is a session day. So I have a full afternoon of video sessions and a couple new faces that I'm looking forward to meeting.
See, that's actually very encouraging that even in the time of a pandemic, we are still getting people who are interested in what we're doing and want to continue to follow us, or new people who are interested in what we're doing. I love that.
The session is so similar over video. I was against telehealth 100% up until I was forced to do it. And the only difference is I can't palpate. So I can't put my hands on someone. That does definitely, I miss that appreciation for what the muscle feels like, what the body feels like when it's moving. But everything else is the same. I watch how the person moves. I see where the compensations are. I look at where the pain is. And then I give you instructions on what to do on your own.
So you can visually see that too. Not just, you have to be obviously on a video component, not just a phone. Yeah.
The only thing that's different is every once in a while the person will laugh at me because when I want a different angle, I get up and I walk to the side of the laptop. And other than that,
is this thing 3D?
Can you turn? Can we rotate?
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. So Stephanie, where can people find you online, social media, whatever?
Yep. Our website is straightforward, houseofphysicaltherapy.com. Everything is the same on social. So we're more active on Instagram. We've been putting out a lot of our favorite exercises, and we're just throwing the exercises up there. So if you need guidance with them, please ask questions, ask when to use them. And I
love it. I'll be linking to things under, I guess, whatever's called the show notes section of the episodes. And I just wanted to quickly also wish you the best, because I filled out your survey today about how you might be kind of gearing towards opening up and doing live things again, now that hopefully, you're part of, I guess, the second round of essential businesses. So I really appreciate you kind of doing a needs assessment on your own patients and clients to see what we're expecting to come out of this as well, and how soon you might have to get things up and running again. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for taking the time to fill that out.
On there,
just a quick screen of how everyone's feeling, who wants the video session still, and who is ready to come in the office. And
Right, because it's about us too. Are we wanting to venture out? I might not necessarily want to just yet, so I might still want to do the telehealth stuff if I were.
Office, or I'm on video sitting at home, it doesn't really change much. So if you're not there,
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Right. I may have pants. I may not have pants. Whatever. Exactly. Well, Stephanie, it has been a delight speaking with you. I'm so, so grateful to everybody who said yes, that they're interested in being on this podcast. And I really wish you all the best. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And I will keep you posted because I'm queuing all of these up as far as when it's going to publish. And obviously, when that time comes, we'll promote it and make sure that you get your name out there as well. So thank you again so much for being on.
Looking forward to hearing the end result.
Thank you so much for joining me this week on the Dish with Dina podcast. I am Dina D'Alessandro, registered dietitian, nutritionist, founder, and chief executive life changer at Dish with Dina, and I'm also your host. If you like what you heard, I would be so grateful if you could subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share this with others who you think might benefit from what we have to offer on these episodes. You can also join my mailing list at dishwithdina.com or email me at info@dishwithdina.com with questions, comments, feedback, and if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, because everybody eats and we all have a story to share. I hope you tune back in next week when we dish again.